She thought she was just buying a sandwich for a homeless man shivering in the rain. She didn't know she was saving the most feared man in the city. Loria Hart was a waitress drowning in debt, invisible to the world. Arthur was the grumpy old beggar who sat on the curb outside her diner, ignored by everyone except her. She gave him coffee. She gave him her lunch. She listened to his ramblings. But the day Arthur collapsed on the cold pavement, Loria's life shattered. Because when she rushed him to the hospital, no one expected the doors to burst open. No one expected a fleet of black SUVs to surround the building. And absolutely no one expected the city's most ruthless mafia boss to walk in, drop to his knees beside the dirty, ragged old man, and whisper the one word that would change Loria's fate forever. Father. The rain in Chicago didn't just fall, it hammered against the pavement like it had a personal vendetta against the city. Inside Miller's Crossing, a greasy spoon diner on the edge of the industrial district, Loria Hart wiped down the counter for the 50th time that night. She was 24, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Her shoes had holes in the soles, and her bank account balance was currently hovering in the negatives. She had exactly $12 to last her until Tuesday. Loria, stop daydreaming and refill the ketchup bottles, shouted Stan, the manager. Stan was a man who sweated grease and had the compassion of a parking meter. On it, Stan, Loria said, her voice steady. She didn't have the energy to argue. The bell above the door jingled. A gust of freezing wind swept through the diner, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and old garbage. Stan looked up, his face twisting into a sneer. "No, get out!" Stan barked, pointing a spatula at the door. "I told you yesterday, Arthur. No loitering. You scare the customers." Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like a heap of discarded laundry. He wore an oversized, moth-eaten army jacket and boots held together by duct tape. His beard was a thicket of grey and white, and his skin was weathered like old leather. This was Arthur. He didn't move. He just stared at the floor, his hands shaking slightly. Whether from the cold or Parkinson's, Loria wasn't sure. I just need a water," Arthur rasped. His voice sounded like gravel crunching under tires. "Water costs money. Out!" Stan yelled, stepping out from behind the grill. Loria slammed the rag down on the counter. "Stan, stop it!" "Excuse me?" "He's staying," Loria said, walking over to the door. She gently took Arthur's arm. The fabric of his coat was soaked through, freezing to the touch. "Come on, Arthur. Sit at the corner booth. It's warm there." "Loria, if you feed him, I'm taking it out of your tips," Stan warned, his face turning a blotchy red. "Take it out of my check, then," Loria shot back, guiding the old man to the booth farthest from the window. She sat him down and immediately went to the kitchen. She poured a large mug of black coffee and plated the staff meal she was supposed to eat later, a hot turkey sandwich with gravy. She brought it to Arthur, whose hands were trembling so badly he couldn't unclasp them from his lap. "Drink the coffee first," Loria whispered, sliding the mug into his hands. "It'll warm your blood." Arthur looked up at her. His eyes were surprising, sharp, intelligent, and a piercing shade of steel blue that didn't match his ragged appearance. "You're a fool, girl," he grumbled, though he wrapped his fingers around the mug. "Spending your money on a ghost." "You're not a ghost, Arthur. You're just hungry." For the next hour, Loria worked her shift, checking on him periodically. This had become their ritual over the last 3 months. Arthur never said thank you. He never smiled. He just complained about the government, the weather, and the quality of the turkey. But he always finished the food. Around 9 p.m., 3 men walked in. They weren't regulars. They wore leather jackets that squeaked, and they smelled of cheap cologne and aggression. They sat 2 booths down from Arthur. Loria felt the hair on her arm stand up. She knew trouble when she saw it. One of the men, a guy with a neck tattoo of a scorpion, looked over at Arthur. "Hey, Stan, since when do you let rats eat at the table?" Stan stayed silent in the kitchen. The coward. The man stood up and walked over to Arthur. He slapped the coffee mug off the table. It shattered on the floor, hot liquid splashing onto Arthur's taped boots. "Oops," the man laughed. "Look at that. Made a mess." Arthur didn't flinch. He just continued eating his sandwich, chewing slowly. "I'm talking to you, old man," the thug snarled, grabbing Arthur by the collar of his jacket. "Let him go." Loria didn't think. She just reacted. She grabbed the heavy glass pot of fresh coffee she had just brewed and marched over. "Let him go, or I swear to God you'll be wearing this scalding roast." The thug looked at Loria, amused. "Feisty, I like that. You protecting your grandpa?" I said let him go. Loria raised the pot higher. Her hands shook, but her eyes were furious. The thug laughed, but he shoved Arthur back into the booth. "Whatever. Place smells like a sewer anyway. Let's go, boys." They left, knocking over a chair on their way out. Loria put the pot down and immediately knelt to clean up the shattered mug. "Are you hurt? Did the coffee burn you?" Arthur looked down at her. For the first time in 3 months, the hardness in his face softened. He reached out a calloused, dirty hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You have the heart of a lioness, Loria," he said softly. "But lions get killed by hyenas if they aren't careful." "I can handle hyenas," Loria muttered, wiping the floor. "We shall see," Arthur said. He reached into his deep pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver coin. It looked ancient. He pressed it into her palm. "Keep this. If you are ever in a corner, hold it tight." Loria smiled sadly. She thought it was just a trinket he found in the trash. "Thanks, Arthur. I'll cherish it." She didn't know that the coin was a marker, a death warrant for her enemies, and a key to a kingdom she didn't know existed. 3 days later, Arthur didn't show up. Loria watched the door all shift. The rain had turned to sleet, coating Chicago in a layer of grey ice. By 10 p.m. she was terrified. Arthur was homeless. In this weather, a missing night could mean death. She clocked out and pulled on her thin coat. Instead of going to her tiny studio apartment, she walked toward the underpass, where she knew Arthur sometimes slept. "Arthur?" she called out, her breath pluming in the freezing air. She found him curled up behind a dumpster in an alleyway 3 blocks from the diner. He was shaking violently, his skin burning hot to the touch, yet his lips were blue. "Arthur! Oh God, Arthur!" Loria dropped to her knees in the slush. "Loria!" he wheezed. His breathing was a wet rattle. "Pneumonia." "Leave! Me!" "Shut up!" she cried, trying to hoist him up. He was dead weight. "I'm calling an ambulance." No cops, no hospitals," he gasped, panic seizing his eyes. "You're dying, Arthur. I don't care what you want." Loria dialed 911. The ride to St. Jude's Hospital was a blur. The paramedics were rough with him, treating him like just another overdose or vagrant freezing to death on the city's dime. Loria rode in the back, holding his dirty hand the entire way. At the hospital, it was worse. They left him on a gurney in the hallway for 2 hours. "Please," Loria begged a passing nurse. "He can't breathe. You need to help him." "We're busy, honey. He's stable. He'll have to wait," the nurse said dismissively, looking at Arthur's rags with disdain. Loria sat in a plastic chair, tears streaming down her face. She held Arthur's hand. He had fallen unconscious. She felt helpless. She was nobody. She had no money, no influence. She couldn't even save one old man. Then, the atmosphere in the ER changed. It started with a low rumble, like thunder, but it came from the entrance. The automatic doors slid open and stayed open. Silence swept through the chaotic waiting room like a wave. The crying babies stopped. The shouting drunks went quiet. Even the nurses stopped moving. Loria looked up, wiping her eyes. 4 men walked in. They moved with a terrifying synchronization, like a pack of wolves on the hunt. They wore Italian suits that cost more than Loria would make in a lifetime. They were massive, their eyes scanning the room with cold, calculated precision. In the center of them walked a 5th man. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained against his charcoal suit. He had jet-black hair slicked back, and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He was devastatingly handsome, but it was a cruel kind of beauty. He radiated power, the kind of power that made the air feel heavy. This was Dita Moretti, the capo dei capi, the man who owned the docks, the politicians, and half the police force. A doctor hurried over, looking pale. "Sir, you can't—" One of the bodyguards simply stepped in the doctor's path, and the doctor froze, swallowing his words. Dita didn't look at the staff. He looked at the patients. His dark eyes scanned the room, row by row, until they landed on the gurney in the hallway, on the pile of rags, and on Loria, who was still holding the old man's hand. Dita walked toward them. His footsteps echoed on the linoleum. Click, click, click. Loria's heart hammered against her ribs. She instinctively moved her body between the scary man and Arthur. You can't be here," she stammered, though her voice was barely a whisper. "Leave him alone." Dita stopped 3 feet away. He looked at Loria. For a second, he looked surprised that a girl in a waitress uniform with holes in her shoes was standing up to him. He ignored her and looked down at Arthur. The silence was deafening. Then, the terrifying Mafia boss did the unthinkable. Dita Moretti, the butcher of Chicago, dropped to one knee on the dirty hospital floor. He reached out and took Arthur's other hand, bowing his head. "Father," Dita whispered, his voice breaking with a raw emotion that terrified Loria more than his anger would have. "I found you." The entire ER seemed to hold its breath. Dita looked up at the doctors, who were now huddled in terror by the nursing station. His face hardened into a mask of pure rage. "Who left him in the hallway?" Dita asked. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The head doctor stepped forward, trembling. We didn't know. He looked like a nobody." Dita finished the sentence. He stood up, towering over everyone. "This man built this city. This man is Arthur Moretti, and you left him to die in a hallway." He turned to his men. "Get the private suite ready. Move him, now, and get the best specialists in the state. If he dies, everyone in this building burns." His men moved instantly, gently lifting Arthur onto a new stretcher. Loria stood there, frozen, her hand still hovering where Arthur's had been. She took a step back, trying to disappear into the wall. Arthur Moretti? The Don who vanished 5 years ago? She had been feeding the most wanted man in America turkey sandwiches. She turned to leave, hoping to slip away in the chaos. "Wait." The voice was low and commanded obedience. Loria stopped. Dita turned to her. He walked closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive tobacco and rain. He looked down at her, his dark eyes analyzing every inch of her face, her tired eyes, her cheap coat, the way her hands were shaking. "Who are you?" he asked. "Nobody," Loria whispered. I'm just the waitress." Dita glanced at the nurse who was cowering nearby. "Did she bring him in?" "Yes," the nurse squeaked. Dita looked back at Loria. His gaze dropped to her hand, the one Arthur had held. He saw the faint smear of dirt on her fingers from the old man's jacket. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for the old man she had protected. "You're not a nobody," Dieter said. He signaled to one of his guards, a giant of a man named Luca. "Luca, put her in the car." Loria's eyes went wide. "What? No! I have to go to work tomorrow. I didn't do anything." Dieter leaned in, his voice dropping to a velvet whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "You kept the king alive when his own wolves couldn't find him. You think I'm going to let you walk back out into the rain?" I don't want to go with you," Loria said, backing up. Dieter smirked, a dangerous, predatory expression. "I didn't ask, Tesoro." He turned and walked away, following his father's stretcher. Before Loria could scream, Luca gently but firmly took her arm. "Don't fight it, miss. You're under the Moretti protection now. It's safer to be in the car than on the street." As Loria was escorted out of the hospital, flanked by men with guns under their jackets, she realized her life as a waitress was over. She had just walked into the lion's den, and the biggest lion of them all had just claimed her. The car was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, quieter than a whisper and smoother than silk. Loria sat in the back seat, her worn sneakers resting on plush carpeting that probably cost more than her rent. Beside her sat Luca, the giant who had escorted her. He hadn't said a word since they left the hospital. Loria stared out the tinted window as the city lights blurred by. She clutched the silver coin Arthur had given her in her pocket, her thumb tracing the worn edges. It was her only anchor to reality. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Safe house," Luca grunted, not looking at her. "The main estate isn't secure until the boss clears the rats." "Rats?" "The people who tried to kill the old man," Luca said, his jaw tightening. "You think Arthur Moretti ended up on the street by accident?" Loria went cold. She had assumed Arthur was mentally ill or had lost his fortune. She never considered he was in hiding. The car slowed as they approached a massive wrought-iron gate. It swung open, revealing a sprawling mansion that looked more like a fortress. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter with Rottweilers. The car stopped. Luca opened the door. "Out! The boss is waiting." Loria stepped out into the crisp night air. The house was intimidating, but it was the man standing on the front steps who stole the oxygen from her lungs. Dieter Moretti had shed his jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing tanned skin and a glimpse of a tattoo on his chest. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, watching her approach with those intense, predatory eyes. "Welcome home, Loria," he said, his voice smooth and dark. "This isn't my home," Loria said, lifting her chin. She was terrified, but she refused to cower. "I want to go back to my apartment." Dieter took a sip of his drink, studying her. "Your apartment? The one with the broken heater and the landlord who tries to open your door at night?" Loria froze. "How do you know that?" "I know everything about you, Loria Hart. Born in Ohio, runaway at 16. Worked 3 jobs to put yourself through community college, but dropped out when your mother got sick. You have $12.43 in your bank account." He took a step closer, towering over her. "You are a survivor. I respect that. But you are also vulnerable. And right now, you are the only person my father trusts." "Is he okay?" Loria asked, her anger momentarily replaced by concern. "He's stable, but he's asking for you." Dieter's expression softened, just a fraction. "He won't eat. He won't speak to the doctors. He just keeps asking for the girl." "So I'm a hostage?" "You're a guest," Dieter corrected. "A very important guest. You will stay here. You will care for him until he recovers. In exchange, I will clear your debts, all of them." Loria stared at him. "Why?" "Because Dieter stepped in close, so close she could feel the heat radiating off him. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Because the Morettis pay their debts, and we owe you a life." He pulled back and snapped his fingers. A maid appeared. "Show Miss Hart to the guest suite. Get her some decent clothes. Burn those rags." "Hey!" Loria protested, looking down at her uniform. "Burn them," Dieter ordered, turning his back on her. "Dinner is at 8. Don't be late." Loria was led up a grand staircase, feeling like Alice falling down a very dangerous rabbit hole. The guest suite was larger than Loria's entire apartment building. The bathroom had a tub big enough to swim in, and the closet was filled with clothes that fit her perfectly. It was terrifyingly efficient. Loria showered, scrubbing the smell of diner grease and hospital antiseptic from her skin. She put on a simple black dress from the closet. It was modest but elegant, made of silk that felt like water against her skin. She found her way down to the dining room. It was a long, cavernous hall, with a table that could seat 30. Dieter sat at the head, alone. He stood when she entered. It was an old-fashioned gesture that surprised her. "Better," he noted, his eyes sweeping over her. "You clean up well, Loria?" "I'm not a doll for you to dress up," she retorted, taking a seat at the far end of the table, miles away from him. Dieter smirked. He picked up his plate and glass and walked the length of the table, sitting directly to her right. "I prefer conversation without shouting." Dinner was served, steak tartare and wine that cost more than a car. Loria barely touched it. "Why was he on the street?" Loria asked abruptly. "Arthur, if he's so powerful, why was he starving?" Dieter's face darkened. The playful arrogance vanished, replaced by a cold fury. He swirled the wine in his glass. 5 years ago there was a coup, a betrayal from within our organization. My father was shot, his car pushed into the river. We thought he was dead. We buried an empty casket." Dieter took a drink. "I spent 5 years hunting the men who did it. I killed them all. Or so I thought." He looked at Loria. "Someone helped him survive the crash. Someone hid him. But the injury, it messed with his mind. He forgot who he was for a long time. He wandered. He became Arthur the beggar. Until you found him. He remembers now. Bits and pieces, but he's terrified. He thinks the shadows are still hunting him." Dieter's hand clenched around the glass until his knuckles turned white. "And he might be right. Which is why you are here. The people who tried to kill him. They will know he's alive soon. And they will know you are the one who saved him." Loria dropped her fork. It clattered against the china. "They'll come after me." "They would have," Dieter said calmly, "if you were still at that diner. But here, in this house, you are untouchable." He reached out and covered her hand with his. His hand was large, warm, and rough. "I will not let anyone touch you, Loria. You saved my father. You are family now." Loria looked at him. For a moment, she didn't see the Mafia Don. She saw a son who had grieved for 5 years, grateful to have his father back. She felt a strange flutter in her chest. Suddenly, the doors to the dining room burst open. Luca ran in, his face pale. He was holding a phone. "Boss, we have a problem." Dieter didn't let go of Loria's hand. "Speak. It's your uncle, Sal," Luca said, breathless. "He just arrived at the gate. He says he heard Arthur is alive. He wants to see his brother." Dieter went rigid. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Sal," Dieter whispered, the name sounding like a curse. Is that bad?" Loria asked, sensing the shift. Dieter stood up, pulling Loria up with him. He moved her behind him, his body shielding hers. "Sal was the one who identified the body 5 years ago," Dieter said, his voice lethal. Sal is the one who took over the casinos when my father died. If Sal is here, the wolves are already inside the fence. He turned to Loria, gripping her shoulders. Go upstairs, lock your door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Luca. Do you understand? Dieter, you're scaring me, Loria whispered. Good. Fear keeps you alive. He pulled a gun from a holster at the small of his back, checking the chamber. Go. Now. Loria ran. As she reached the top of the stairs, she heard the heavy front doors creak open below. She heard a boisterous, overly friendly voice boom through the hall. Dieter, my favorite nephew. Is it true? Is the old ghost back from the dead? Loria peeked over the railing. She saw a man walking in, older, heavy-set, wearing a white suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him were 6 men. Dieter stood alone in the center of the hall, gun at his side. Hello, Uncle Sal, Dieter said. You're just in time for the funeral. Whose funeral? Sal laughed. Yours, Dieter said. Loria gasped, and Sal's eyes snapped up to the landing. He saw her. Well, well, Sal smiled, licking his lips. And who is the little bird? Is she the one who found him? Dieter stepped in front of Sal's line of sight. Look at her again, Sal, and I'll take your eyes. Loria didn't wait to hear the rest. She sprinted to her room, slammed the door, and locked it. Her heart was pounding like a jackhammer. She leaned against the door, sliding down to the floor. She reached into her pocket for the coin Arthur gave her. She needed comfort. She looked at it closely for the first time under the bright room lights. It wasn't just a coin, it was a medallion. On one side was a lion, on the other an inscription in Latin, Regem Facit, Kingmaker, and beneath it a series of numbers. It wasn't a coin, it was a key to a safe deposit box, or a vault. Arthur hadn't just given her a trinket, he had given her the leverage Dieter had been looking for, the proof of who betrayed him. Loria realized with a jolt. Sal wasn't here for Arthur. He was here for the coin, and she was the one holding it. The mansion shuddered. Downstairs, the sharp crack of gunfire echoed like a whip snapping against the marble floors. Loria scrambled away from the door, her breath coming in short. Terrified gasps. She looked at the coin in her hand, the heavy silver medallion with the Latin inscription, Regem Facit. Kingmaker. If Sal was here, he wasn't just here to kill his brother. He was here to erase the past and steal the future. And this coin was the key. Loria didn't hide under the bed. A waitress from the rough side of Chicago knew better than to corner herself. She scanned the room. Think. Think. She ran to the heavy velvet curtains. She unhooked the thick, tasseled tie-back rope and wrapped it around her hand, testing its weight. It wasn't a weapon, but it was something. A heavy thud shook her door. Then another. "Open up, sweetheart!" A rough voice shouted from the hallway. It wasn't Dieter. "Uncle Sal just wants to talk." Loria backed toward the balcony doors, her hand tightening on the heavy rope tassel. Blam! The lock shattered. The door swung open, kicking up splinters. A man in a grey suit stepped in, one of Sal's thugs. He held a pistol lazily at his side, grinning. "There you are," he leered. "Pretty little thing. Hand over the old man's pocket change, and maybe I won't hurt you too bad." Loria held up her empty hands, trembling. "I don't have any money." "Don't play dumb." The man stepped closer, holstering his gun to grab her. He underestimated her. He saw a scared girl. He didn't see the woman who had carried boiling coffee pots to defend a homeless man. As he reached for her, Loria swung. She whipped the heavy, metal-weighted curtain tassel with all her strength. It struck him square across the nose with a sickening crunch. The man howled, stumbling back, clutching his face. Blood spurted through his fingers. "You bit!" he screamed, reaching for his gun again. But he never got the chance. A dark shadow lunged from the hallway. Dieter appeared behind the thug, moving with the terrifying speed of a panther. He wrapped his arm around the man's neck and twisted. A sharp snap echoed, and the man crumpled to the floor. Dieter stood there, breathing hard. His white shirt was stained with red, but it wasn't the thug's blood. A dark crimson patch was spreading across Dieter's left shoulder. "Dieter, you're shot!" Loria cried, dropping the rope. "Grazed," Dieter grunted, kicking the thug's gun away. He looked at Loria, his eyes wild with adrenaline. He saw the improvised weapon in her hand and the man on the floor. A flicker of intense pride crossed his face. "You fight dirty," Dieter said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I like it." "He wanted the coin," Loria said, rushing to him. She pressed her hands against his shoulder to staunch the bleeding. "Arthur gave me a coin. They know about it." Dieter's eyes widened. "The Praetorian coin? My father gave that to you? I thought it was a quarter." "We have to move," Dieter hissed, wincing as he grabbed her hand with his good arm. "Sal brought more men than we thought. The house is compromised. We need to get to the library. It's fortified." They ran into the hallway. The air smelled of gunpowder. Bodies lay on the grand staircase, both Sal's men and Dieter's guards. It was a war zone. "Keep your head down," Dieter commanded. They sprinted down the long corridor. Bullets chipped the plaster above their heads as another gunman appeared at the far end. Dieter fired back with deadly precision, dropping the attacker with a single shot without breaking stride. They burst into the library. Dieter slammed the heavy oak doors and threw the deadbolt. He dragged a massive mahogany desk in front of it. "Safe," he exhaled, sliding down against the desk to the floor. His face was pale. The blood loss was getting to him. Loria knelt beside him. "Let me see the wound." "It's fine," Dieter muttered, trying to push her away. "Shut up and let me help you," Loria snapped, ripping the fabric of his shirt to expose the wound. "You saved my life. Let me save yours." Dieter stopped fighting. He looked at her, really looked at her, as she worked. The chaos outside the door faded. In the eye of the storm, it was just them. The library was silent, save for the heavy breathing of the two people on the floor. Loria had found a first aid kit in the desk drawer and was bandaging Dieter's shoulder. The bullet had torn through the muscle, but missed the bone and artery. "You have gentle hands," Dieter whispered. His voice was strained, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving behind the pain. "I'm a waitress," Loria said softly, tying the bandage. "I'm used to cleaning up messes." "This isn't your mess, Loria. I'm sorry I dragged you into this." Dieter reached up with his good hand and touched her cheek. His thumb brushed over her skin, leaving a streak of his own blood there. It looked like war paint. Loria didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch. "I dragged myself into it when I gave your father that sandwich." Their eyes met. The tension in the room shifted from danger to something electric. Dieter leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Loria," he murmured. "If we get out of this." "When we get out of this," she corrected him. Before the moment could go further, a section of the bookshelf on the far wall groaned. Loria jumped, gasping. The bookshelf swung open like a door. Luca stepped out, pushing a wheelchair. In the chair sat Arthur Moretti. He looked different than the man in the diner. He was clean-shaven, wearing a silk robe. He looked frail, but his eyes, those steel-blue eyes, were sharp and lucid. "Father!" Dieter tried to stand, but winced. "Sit down, Dom," Arthur commanded. His voice was weak, but carried the authority of a king. He looked at Loria. "Hello, my girl. I see you met the wolves." "Arthur," Loria breathed, You're okay." "Better than I have been in years," Arthur said. He wheeled himself closer. "Sal is outside?" "Yes," Dieter said, his face hardening. "He wants the chair, Papa. He thinks you're dead or too weak to stop him." Arthur chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Sal was always a greedy fool. He doesn't want the chair, Dieter. He wants the accounts. He spent the last 5 years draining the family reserves, but he hit a wall. He can't access the Cayman vaults." Arthur turned to Loria and held out his hand. "Because he doesn't have the key." Loria reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver coin. She placed it in Arthur's palm. "The Praetorian coin," Arthur said, rubbing it with his thumb. "It contains a micro-engraving on the edge, a biological code. Without this, the family fortune, billions of dollars, is just numbers on a screen that no one can touch. Sal is bankrupting the organization. He needs this to save his own skin." Dieter looked at the coin, then at Loria. "You walked around with the entire Moretti Empire in your pocket for 3 days?" "I almost used it to scratch a lottery ticket," Loria admitted. Dieter laughed. It was a genuine, hearty laugh that startled even him. "God, I love this woman." He froze, realizing what he had just said. Loria froze too, her cheeks flushing pink. Arthur smiled knowingly. "Focus, children. Sal is outside. He has us surrounded. But we have something he doesn't." "What's that?" Loria asked. "Leverage," Arthur said. "This library has a secure line. Dieter, if you plug this coin into the mainframe reader, we don't just access the money. We access the blackmail files. Every bribe Sal paid, every judge he bought, every person he killed. We can send it all to the FBI, the press, and the commission in 5 seconds. Mutually assured destruction," Dieter said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Sal goes to prison for life, or he faces the commission's execution squad." "Exactly," Arthur said. "But we have to buy time for the upload. The door won't hold forever." Boom! As if on cue, an explosion rocked the library doors. The heavy wood splintered. Smoke poured in. "They're breaching!" Luca shouted, racking his shotgun. Dieter stood up, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. He grabbed a fresh magazine for his pistol. "Loria," Dieter said, his voice fierce. "Take the coin. Go to the desk. Plug it into the computer. Do not stop typing until the upload is complete." "What about you?" Loria cried. Dieter walked over to her. He grabbed the back of her head and kissed her, hard, desperate, and full of promise. "I'm going to introduce my uncle to his retirement plan," Dieter growled against her lips. He turned to the door, flanked by Luca. Arthur sat calmly in his wheelchair, holding a small revolver he had pulled from his robe. "Ready, my son?" Arthur asked. "Always, father." The library doors blasted open. Through the smoke, Sal's silhouette appeared. "Knock, knock!" Sal screamed. "Loria, now!" Dieter roared, opening fire. Loria sprinted to the desk, slamming the coin into the reader slot on the computer. A loading bar appeared on the screen. "Authenticating 10%. Bullets flew over her head. Glass shattered, but Loria didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the screen. 20%. She was the waitress who fed the king. Now, she was the queen who would save the kingdom. The library, once a sanctuary of silence and old paper, had transformed into a deafening cage of violence. The air, usually smelling of leather and lemon polish, was now thick with the acrid, metallic sting of gunpowder and the choking dust of pulverized drywall. Dieter Moretti moved like a demon through the haze. He was a blur of charcoal wool and lethal intent, his gun flashing in the smoky gloom. He traded shots with the shadows pouring through the shattered mahogany doors, each recoil sending a fresh jolt of agony through his body. The bullet that had grazed his shoulder earlier burned like a branding iron, and a fresh impact against his ballistic vest had cracked a rib, stealing his breath. But he didn't fall. He couldn't. Not while she was still in the line of fire. "Cover her!" Dieter roared to Luca, his voice raw. He forced himself upright, firing 2 suppression shots to keep Sal's enforcers pinned behind the overturned hallway furniture. At the heavy oak desk, Loria Hart sat in the eye of the hurricane. Her hands, which had spent years carrying heavy trays and scrubbing counters, were now the only thing standing between the Moretti family and total annihilation. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, trembling but accurate. The computer screen was her entire world, a glowing blue rectangle in the darkness. Authenticating encryption. Uploading. 65%. A bullet whizzed past her ear, so close she felt the wind of its passage. It embedded itself in the bookshelf behind her, sending a shower of wood splinters raining down into her hair. Loria gasped, ducking lower, but she didn't pull her hands away. She thought of the cold nights in the diner, the feeling of invisibility, the way Arthur's hands had shaken when he couldn't hold a spoon. She thought of Dieter, bleeding and fighting like a man possessed just to keep her safe. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a girl with $12 in her bank account. In this terrifying moment, amidst the thunder of war, she was the line between order and oblivion. "She's dumping the files!" Sal's voice screeched from the hallway, cracking with a frantic, high-pitched panic. Dieter's uncle was crouched behind a leather sofa near the entrance, his pristine white suit now stained with soot and sweat. He could see the screen from his angle. He could see the progress bar that was stripping him of his power, second by agonizing second. "The accounts are locking!" Sal screamed, checking his phone with a shaking hand. "0. How can it be 0? Stop her! Forget the old man! Kill the girl!" Sal broke cover. The desperation of a man watching his stolen kingdom evaporate overrode his survival instinct. He didn't care about Dieter or Luca anymore. He scrambled over the debris, his eyes wide with a madness that had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with greed. His gun had jammed, useless metal in his grip. With a snarl, he drew a heavy, jagged combat knife from his belt. "Loria, move!" Dieter shouted. He tried to pivot, to intercept his uncle, but 2 of Sal's enforcers unleashed a hail of gunfire that pinned him tight against the wall. He watched, helpless, as Sal sprinted toward the desk. "You filthy little street rat!" Sal roared, raising the knife. "You think you can bankrupt me?" Loria turned just as Sal lunged over the desk. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the sweat dripping from Sal's forehead, the veins bulging in his neck, the glint of the blade destined for her heart. She had no weapon. She had nowhere to run. She threw her hands up in a futile instinct to shield her face, screaming. Crack! It wasn't the rapid pop, pop, pop of the automatic pistols. It was a single, thunderous boom, a sound like a cannon firing, heavy and final. Sal froze in midair, his momentum arrested by a brutal, invisible force. His eyes, wide with rage a second ago, went blank with shock. He looked down at his chest. A blooming red flower was spreading rapidly across the front of his white shirt, destroying the silk. He gasped, a wet, gurgling sound. The knife clattered from his hand, landing on the mahogany desk inches from Loria's trembling fingers. Sal slumped forward, sliding off the desk like a sack of wet cement and crashing to the floor in a heap. The room went instantly, terrifyingly silent. The gunfire stopped. The shouting died. Even the dust seemed to settle in reverence. Sal's men lowered their weapons, looking back and forth in confusion, unsure of who had fired the shot that felled their boss. Dieter stared. Luca stared. Loria, chest heaving, slowly lowered her hands and looked past the desk. Arthur Moretti was standing. The wheelchair had been pushed back against the wall. The frail old man, who had spent months shivering in alleyways and eating charity turkey sandwiches, was standing on his own 2 feet. He swayed slightly, his legs atrophied and weak, but his spine was steel. In his hand, he held a smoking vintage revolver, the kind of gun that ended arguments in a different era. His face wasn't the face of Arthur the beggar. It was the face of the godfather who had ruled Chicago's underworld for 40 years. It was a face carved from granite. "No one," Arthur said, his voice low, gravelly, but carrying to every corner of the room with absolute authority, "touches my daughter." He didn't mean his biological daughter. He meant the girl who had saved him when the world left him to rot. Dieter stepped out from cover, ignoring the gun still pointed in his direction. He walked over to his uncle's body, kicking the knife away across the floorboards. He looked down. Sal was still breathing, but his breaths were shallow, rattling through the blood, filling his lungs. "You lost, Uncle," Dieter said, his voice devoid of pity. "You bet against family. You always lose when you bet against family." "The money," Sal gurgled, his eyes glazing over as he stared at the ceiling. "It's gone." "Upload complete." The computer screen behind Loria flashed a bright, cheerful green. Loria let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for a lifetime. Her knees gave out, and she slumped back into the chair, trembling violently. "The money isn't just gone," Loria said, her voice shaking, but gaining strength as she spoke. "It's frozen in a secure trust managed by the Federal Treasury. And the files, the ones on the bribery, the murders, the betrayal of the commission, they just went to the heads of the 5 families in New York, and the FBI Cybercrimes Division." Sal's eyes went wide, fear finally eclipsing the greed in his final moments. Suddenly, a buzzing sound broke the silence. It was Sal's phone in his pocket. Then Dieter's phone buzzed. Then Lucas. Then the phones of every single surviving enforcer in the room. It was a discordant symphony of notifications. One of Sal's enforcers, a large man with a scar across his nose, pulled his phone out. He looked at the screen, and the color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. "It's a kill order," he whispered, the horror evident in his voice. "From the High Commission in New York. There's a $10 million bounty on Sal, and a clean-up order for anyone still standing with him." The enforcer looked at the dying man on the floor, then at Dieter, who stood tall despite his wounds. He looked at Arthur, the resurrected king. "I'm out," the enforcer said, dropping his gun. It hit the floor with a heavy clatter. "We're all out." One by one, the metal rain began. Pistols, submachine guns, and knives were dropped to the floor. In the world of the Mafia, loyalty is a commodity bought with power. When the power dies, the loyalty evaporates. No one dies for a corpse. No one dies for a bankrupt traitor. "Get him out of here," Dieter ordered, gesturing to Sal's body. "And get out of my city. If I see any of you in Chicago by sunrise, the bounty gets collected." The men scrambled, dragging Sal's body out of the library, vanishing like smoke. When the doors finally closed, the silence that followed was heavy and intimate. Dieter holstered his gun. He flinched as the adrenaline began to fade, the pain of his broken rib and grazed shoulder finally registering. He walked over to Loria. He didn't say a word. He simply pulled her up from the chair and crushed her into his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his breathing ragged. Loria wrapped her arms around him, careful of his injuries, feeling the frantic, steady beat of his heart against hers. She smelled the gunpowder and the sweat, but beneath it, she smelled him. Cedar and rain. "It's over," he whispered against her skin, his voice thick with emotion. "Loria, God, you were incredible. It's finally over." Loria closed her eyes, letting the tears finally fall. She looked over Dita's shoulder. Arthur had sunk back into his wheelchair, his burst of strength exhausted. He looked tired, older than before, but he was smiling. It was a genuine, warm smile. He caught her eye and gave her a small, respectful nod, a bow from one sovereign to another. The king was back. But looking at Dita, feeling the way he held her as if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth, Loria knew the crown had already passed. 6 months later, the harsh Chicago winter had melted away, washing the grime from the streets and giving way to a lush, vibrant spring. Miller's Crossing, the greasy spoon diner where the coffee was always burnt and the heating never worked, was gone. It had been bought out, boarded up, and was slated for demolition. But across town, in the heart of the Golden Coast district, where the streetlights were golden orbs and the sidewalks were clean, a new establishment was opening its doors for the first time. The sign above the door was modest, but expensive, the Lion's Share. Inside, the air smelled of rich espresso, slow-roasted meats, and fresh lilies. The decor was elegant, dark mahogany wood, polished brass, and emerald velvet booths. It was warm, inviting, and impeccably classy. And running the floor, looking radiant in a tailored navy dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, was Loria Hart. She wasn't wearing an apron. She wasn't wearing shoes with holes in the soles. She moved with a grace and confidence that turned heads. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was the owner. The brass bell above the heavy oak door chimed. Loria looked up from the reservation book, a genuine smile lighting up her face. Dita Moretti walked in. He looked different. The darkness that had clung to him like a second skin 6 months ago had lifted. He looked lighter, younger. The scar on his eyebrow remained, a testament to his past, but his eyes were bright. He wore a casual charcoal suit, the top button of his shirt undone. He walked up to the podium, leaning over to rest his elbows on the wood, invading her personal space in the way only he was allowed to. "Table for 2?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that still sent shivers down her spine. "I hear the owner is beautiful, and I'd like to buy her a drink." "I don't know. We're fully booked for 3 months," Loria teased, her eyes dancing. "The food critic from the Tribune is at table 4, and the mayor is at table 7. "I'm sure you can pull some strings," Dita grinned. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar object, the heavy, tarnished silver Praetorian coin. He slid it across the podium with a metallic clink. "I have a deposit." Loria laughed, a sound that was free and joyous. She covered his hand with hers, her fingers interlocking with his. "Put that away. Your father will be looking for it." "He's in the back," Dita said, jerking his thumb toward the private VIP booth in the secluded corner. "He's critiquing the Turkey Club. He says your chef makes the gravy almost as good as you did, but it lacks your personal touch." Loria looked over. Arthur sat in the best seat in the house. He was reading a newspaper, a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked healthy, his beard trimmed and styled, wearing a 3-piece suit. He sensed her gaze, looked up, and raised his coffee mug in a silent, affectionate toast. Loria felt a lump in her throat. She looked back at Dita, her heart swelling so full she thought it might burst. "You know," she said softly, tracing the line of Dita's jaw. "I saved an old man because I thought he had nothing. I just wanted him to be warm. I didn't know he would give me everything." Dita took her hand, lifting it to his lips to kiss her knuckles, his eyes locked on hers with intense devotion. "He gave you a coin, Loria. He gave you a start," Dita whispered. "But you? You gave us a home. You gave us our lives back." He leaned in and they kissed, soft, lingering, and full of a promise that this was just the beginning. Outside, the sun was setting over the Chicago skyline, painting the glass towers in shades of violet and gold. The city was still loud, still dangerous, and still wild. But inside, it was warm, and for the first time in her life, Loria Hart wasn't just surviving the storm. She was ruling it. And that is the incredible story of how a single act of kindness to a stranger changed the destiny of an entire empire. It's a powerful reminder that you never truly know who you are talking to, and that sometimes the people society ignores are the ones who cast the biggest shadows. What did you think of Loria's transformation? Do you think you would have had the courage to stand your ground in that library? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your theories and reactions. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It really supports the channel and lets me know you want more intense drama and romance stories like this one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next episode. I have a psychological thriller coming next week that you will not want to miss. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.